Taking you back to one of our top stories, which is about Donald Trump saying that the U.S. is set to renew nuclear testing after almost 33 years. And we have different voices coming in on this from, of course, abroad as well as from within his own administration. Let's talk about it. We have Prabhu Dayal with us, former senior diplomat, joining us now. And good evening to you. Prabhu Dayal, what do you make in the first place of what Donald Trump is saying, and the way it's almost characteristic that he offers little information, little proof, but makes these assertions and then says something in a reactive way about them?
Well, Gautam, first of all, thanks for having me on your show. You know, President Trump posted on social media that he had instructed the Department of Defense to immediately restart the process of nuclear testing. He said that the US needs to test these nuclear weapons because Russia, China, North Korea, and Pakistan have all been testing. Now, Trump claimed that the US doesn't necessarily know where these powerful nations that are testing nuclear weapons have been testing them, but he asserted that the testing is being done. Now, what he said was perhaps they test way underground where people don't know exactly what's happening. Now, there are many experts who have commented that there is no credible evidence that Russia, China, or Pakistan are conducting nuclear weapons. Of course, they've also pointed out that North Korea is the only country to have conducted an explosion in the 21st century, but even that country put a moratorium in 2018 on nuclear testing. Now, the question is, what should India's policy be on this matter? Now, Pakistan and China are hostile countries, and we need to keep a close watch on whatever they are doing, particularly anything which could impinge on our security interests. Now, India should rely on its own intelligence assessments. Now, a very important strategic challenge for India is the close relationship between China and Pakistan. And given this complex and persistent challenge, India must maintain a strong and vigilant defense posture to manage potential dangers from these two fronts. Now, at the same time, India should publicly urge all nuclear-armed states to maintain the informal moratorium on nuclear testing and engage in diplomatic efforts towards global nuclear disarmament rather than any sort of escalation. Now, India should issue a clear statement that it is not conducting nuclear explosive tests in line with its voluntary unilateral moratorium. And India should also use the opportunity to reiterate its commitment to its non-first use doctrine and credible minimum deterrence posture, thus highlighting the responsible nuclear power status that we have. Now, behind the scenes, of course, Indian diplomats should engage with US counterparts to seek clarifications on the basis of President Trump's claims and express concerns about any potential US moves to resume its own nuclear testing. This approach, I think, would reinforce India's image as a responsible and measured nuclear power, which is also indirectly urging the US to reconsider any move towards resuming its own nuclear tests, which could have global repercussions.
Okay. So you have expressed India's concern as to how it should first arise and then be expressed as well in the wider global community. But what do you make of what the U.S. Energy Secretary Chris Wright has said that these tests are not the kind where you see a mushroom cloud or the ground shakes when explosions take underground. They are, he said, they're non-critical explosions. They test geometry and certain parameters or certain triggers to the actual bomb.
You know, the U.S. Energy Secretary, Chris Wright, who's actually responsible for nuclear testing, clarified that the ordered U.S. nuclear tests would be non-critical explosions, meaning they would involve all the components of a nuclear weapon except the nuclear material, which would lead to a mushrooming of a nuclear cloud. So there would be no such mushroom that would be produced. The important thing is that even within the United States, people are speaking with different voices. President Trump, of course, very categorically said that he doesn't know where the tests are being conducted, but perhaps they've been conducted very deep underground. And there have been some slight tremors which have been felt. So there is nothing very conclusive in terms of evidence. But the important point is that there are concerns which he has expressed, which are undeniable because of the fact that there are some countries like Pakistan, China, and of course North Korea, which have a mischievous intent globally. And in terms of our own security interests, China and Pakistan directly impinge. So while there are different voices within the US administration pointing to whether or not such tests, which President Trump has hinted, have actually taken place, the fact is we cannot ignore it. As I said, we have to engage in behind-the-scenes discussions with US diplomats and other administration officials.
Okay, but why do you think
ascertain the correct position?
Why do you think Donald Trump has responded in the manner he's basically trying to say that if somebody else is doing a wrong thing, I'll also do a wrong thing because basically that is something that needs to be reciprocated. But the other route would have been to go the sanctions way, go the punitive way. After all, in the case of India, ostensibly for buying Russian oil, we've been laboured with 25% extra tariffs. Why not sanctions?
You know, the Russians have indicated that they would resume testing of missiles which are capable of carrying nuclear weapons. Now, President Trump has tried his best to impose sanctions on Russia, particularly in terms of the oil-related sanctions. However, these don't seem to have worked fully. And there seems to be no end to the Russia-Ukraine war. There is, in fact, a danger that Russia could escalate. In fact, the Russians have hinted that things could go nuclear. So in the light of these circumstances, President Trump has hinted that the US may also resume the testing of nuclear weapons. Of course, as Chris Wright has clarified, these would not have nuclear ingredients, so they would just be the sort of weapons which could lead to a further, preparedness on the part of the US defense system, though it would not be a nuclear explosion per se. So all told, I think whatever President Trump has said relates to the deteriorating situation in the conflict between Russia and Ukraine and represents the apprehensions which the US administration has towards what further steps the Russians might be taking, which would need the United States government to also take care of precautionary measures. But as I said, what he said about China and Pakistan has to be taken somewhat seriously because this matter impinges on our security interests. We can't take things for granted.
All right, we'll have to wait and see how the Indian government or the Ministry of External Affairs really reacts to it. I'm sure questions will be posed as and when the opportunity arises for the spokesperson to respond to them. Thanks a lot for joining us for the moment, Ambassador Prabhu Dayal.